The air in the shuttle bay tasted like cold metal and ozone. Ji-hun shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the stiff fabric of his new gray cadet uniform rustling. All around him, 60 other young humans murmured in low, anxious tones. He could see Hai-Su a few rows ahead, her dark hair tied back in a severe, perfect bun. She stood perfectly still, her eyes scanning the curved walls of the bay as if memorizing every bolt and panel. That a resonant hum filled the room, and the massive outer doors began to iris open. The chatter died instantly. Beyond the shimmering energy field that kept the air in, the inky blackness of space was punctuated by a sweeping, impossible vista. The Galactic Integration and Defense Academy hung against the backdrop of a crescent Earth. It wasn't a single building, but a cluster of graceful, crystalline spires and smooth, organic-looking pods, connected by transparent tubes where strange, gliding shapes moved. It looked less like a school and more like a piece of jewelry. Yuna's stomach tightened. This was it. Humanity's first, fragile step onto the galactic stage. He was a mechanic's son from a cramped Seoul neighborhood. What was he doing here? The shuttle pilot's voice, tinny over the intercom, broke the silence. Cadets, prepare for umbilical docking. Follow the guidance lights. Do not touch the internal walls of the connector. Welcome to your new home. The walk through the transparent tube was a silent, terrifying parade. Below his feet, the blue and white marble of Earth slowly turned. He felt dizzyingly small. The group was ushered into a vast circular chamber. The gravity felt different here. Lighter, somehow making every step feel floaty and imprecise. The walls were a smooth, pearlescent white that emitted a soft glow. There were no chairs. They waited. Minutes stretched. The human cadets fidgeted, exchanged nervous glances. Then, without a sound, a section of the wall seemed to dissolve. She entered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Instructor Valkyra was tall, at least 7 feet. Her form was elegant and powerfully built, covered in a smooth, interlocking plates that resembled polished amber or topaz. They weren't armor. They were her skin, catching the light in subtle, crystalline facets. Her face was elongated, with large, dark eyes that held no white, just pools of deep, intelligent obsidian. She moved with an eerie, fluid grace, each step utterly silent in the low gravity. She stopped in the center of the circle they had unconsciously formed, her gaze sweeping over them. It felt less like being seen and more like being scanned. "I am Valkyra of the Trilixian Concord," she said. Her voice was clear, melodic, but carried a weight, like stone chiming. "You are the 3rd human cohort. You are here because the Galactic Council, in its infinite political wisdom, has decreed that your species must be given a chance to integrate. To prove you can contribute beyond your designated resource sector." She began to pace slowly, her dark eyes passing over each face. "Your predecessors failed. The first cohort lacked discipline. The second lacked cohesion. Preliminary analysis suggests your species suffers from a profound cognitive dissonance. You believe yourselves unique. You believe your turbulent, violent history has granted you some hidden strength. You are mistaken." Ji-hun felt a hot spark of anger in his chest but clenched his jaw. He kept his eyes forward. Valkyra stopped, turning to face them fully. "Look around you. The technology that built this station, the principles of faster-than-light travel, the biological harmony of most species here, all of this was achieved through rigorous application of logic, specialization, and the elimination of inefficient variables. Emotion is an inefficiency. Individual physical fragility is an inefficiency. You are a species of inefficiencies." She gestured with a long, 3-fingered hand, and a holographic display sprang to life above her. It showed comparative biology charts. A Trilixian with redundant neural clusters and a carbonate-reinforced skeleton. A mantid with chitinous armor and reflexive combat speeds. Even a gentle-looking, furry Groxel with a natural radiation-shielding coat. Next to them, a human form was highlighted in stark red, pinpointing weaknesses. Soft skin, single heart, slow neural response, vulnerable psychology. "You are not special," Valkyra stated, the words falling like stones. "You are baseline. You are a template of what not to be. You are here to learn your place in a system that has evolved beyond your innate limitations. Your success will not be measured by exceptional achievement, but by your ability to mitigate your inherent flaws and follow the protocols of your betters. A heavy silence pressed down on the chamber. Ji-hun saw Hai-Su's shoulders were stiff, her hands curled into tight fists at her sides. A boy to his left, Junesio, looked pale. Your quarters have been assigned, Valkyra continued, the hologram winking out. Your schedule is now active on your personal pads. First physical assessment is in 12 station hours. I suggest you attempt to rest. You will need it. With a final, dismissive glance, she turned, and the wall dissolved once more for her exit. She was gone as silently as she had arrived. The spell broke. A collective exhale filled the room, followed by a low buzz of agitated voices. Who does she think she is? Someone hissed. Did you see those charts? They think we're made of glass. Ji-hun didn't join in. He was staring at the spot where Valkyra had stood. The words "you are not special" echoed in his head. They weren't just an insult. They were a warning. This wasn't just a school. It was a test designed for them to fail. Hai-Su turned around, her dark eyes meeting his. In them, he didn't see fear or anger, but a sharp, calculating focus. She gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if she had come to the same conclusion. They were being measured against a ruler that wasn't meant for them. They were herded out by a floating, silent drone towards their living pods. Ji-hun looked back at the viewing port in the corridor. Earth hung there, beautiful and distant. He thought of his father's repair shop, full of broken appliances and old machines. His father's philosophy was simple. Everything has a use. You just have to figure out what it's for, even if it's not what the maker intended. Valkyra saw them as broken, flawed things. But in that shop, Ji-hun had learned that sometimes the broken part, repurposed, was exactly what you needed to make the whole machine work again. He followed the others, the instructor's words still chilling the air. They were told they were nothing special. But as he walked, a quiet, stubborn thought took root. Maybe, just maybe, being not special in the way the galaxy defined it could become their own kind of strength. They just had to survive long enough to figure out what it was for. 12 station hours was not enough time to adjust. The artificial day-night cycle felt wrong. The air smelled too clean, devoid of the familiar sense of rain, concrete, or food. The gravity, set at a compromise point for multiple species, was just light enough to make every movement feel untethered, like the world was subtly betraying the expectations of the human body. The first physical assessment was held in a cavernous training sphere called the Crucible. The walls were a dull, impact-absorbing black. Around the upper rim, observation platforms held alien cadets of other species. Their forms were strange and varied, some insectal, some sleek and furred, others with shimmering hides. They watched in silence. Ji-hun felt like a specimen in a zoo. Instructor Valkyra stood at the center of the sphere, now clad in a form-fitting suit that highlighted her crystalline plates. Beside her floated a mantid cadet, its body a sculpture of greenish chitin, its limbs long and multi-jointed. It was utterly still. Today is baseline locomotion and stability, Valkyra announced, her voice carrying easily in the acoustically perfect space. You will traverse a simple variable gravity pathway. The goal is fluidity, balance, and speed. Observe. The mantid cadet shot forward. It didn't run. It flowed. In the center of the sphere, a pathway of glowing blue panels materialized, winding and twisting, dipping and rising. The gravity along it changed in patches. Some sections were near-Earth normal, others were almost 0G, and some were double weight. The mantid adjusted without a single stumble. Its limbs found perfect purchase on every surface. In sections of 0G, it used subtle flicks of its limbs to propel itself with pinpoint accuracy. It completed the circuit in less than a minute, coming to a silent halt back at the start. Acceptable, Valkyra said.
Humans.
First cadet. She pointed at a tall, athletic girl from the European bloc, Elena. She stepped forward, her face set with determination. The pathway reset. Elena took off at a sprint. It was a disaster from the third step. She hit the first low-gravity patch and overleaped, her body tumbling off the narrow pathway. She flailed, trying to reorient in the open air of the sphere, her training suit emitting a soft, warning chime. A drone zipped in and gently guided her, disoriented and red-faced, back to the start. The alien observers made soft, clicking sounds point one by one. The humans tried. The men who were strong on Earth found their strength useless when their mass halved or doubled without warning. Quick runners lost all coordination in zero-G. Ji-hun watched, his heart sinking. It wasn't a test of skill. It was a demonstration of their fundamental wrongness for this environment. When his turn came, he took a deep breath. He thought not of running, but of his father's shop. Moving in a cluttered space, adjusting to the unpredictable, he stepped onto the first panel. The gravity was normal. Then the next was light. He felt his body start to float and immediately crouched low, spreading his arms for balance, his feet seeking friction on the glowing surface. He moved slowly, deliberately, like someone walking on ice. He made it through the light gravity section without falling. A double gravity patch hit him like a sack of sand. His knees buckled, but he'd been anticipating a change. He grunted, leaned forward, and pushed through, his muscles burning. He was slow, painfully slow, but he was moving. Then he reached a curved section that spiraled up the wall, gravity shifting randomly. He lost his footing. His ankle twisted sideways with a sickening pop, and he fell, tumbling into the open space with a gasp of pain. The drone collected him. As he was brought back, he saw Valkyra watching him, her expression unreadable. He had lasted longer than most, but he had still failed. His ankle throbbed. The final cadet was Hai-Su. She didn't run or walk. She studied the pathway for a full 30 seconds after it appeared, her eyes tracking the sequence of the glowing panels. Then she began. She moved with a strange, staccato rhythm. She would take 2 quick steps, then pause on a panel as the gravity shifted, letting her body settle before pushing off again. In zero-G sections, she didn't try to run. She pushed off carefully from the edge, controlling her spin with small motions of her hands, drifting to the next panel. It wasn't fluid. It wasn't graceful. It was a series of calculated, small victories. She was the only human to complete the full circuit without a catastrophic fall. Though her time was triple that of the mantis, she returned to the group, breathing heavily, a sheen of sweat on her forehead. Valkyra approached her. Your method was inefficient. You stopped 17 times. You used hesitation as a crutch. Hai-Su met her gaze. The parameters were to traverse the pathway. They did not specify a continuous velocity. A slight ripple went through the observing aliens. Valkyra's dark eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Cleverness is not a substitute for capability. Your species' tendency to exploit loopholes in instructions is noted. It is a sign of weak compliance, not strong understanding. The next trial was tactical analysis. They were shown a holographic simulation of a famous space battle, the Battle of Clarence Drift. Valkyra queried them on fleet movements, weapons efficiency, and command decisions. Human answers about flanking maneuvers, sacrificing ships for positional advantage, and targeting command vessels were met with cold dismissal. The Groxel command ship was emitting a unique life sign signature. Valkyra explained, replaying the simulation. A Trilixian harmonic sensor would have identified it as the primary target instantly. Your suggestion of reading the enemy's aggression is a primitive psychological guesswork. It is unreliable. Hai-Su raised her hand. But the historical record shows the Allied fleet did win by targeting the command ship after analyzing its movement patterns. They didn't have harmonic sensors. They won despite their ignorance, not because of their intuition, Valkyra countered. They incurred 42% higher casualties than a Trilixian fleet would have. Your celebration of victory is a celebration of waste. Your emotional attachment to winning blinds you to the cost. This is not tactics. This is butchery with a fortunate outcome. The words were a cold slap. Ji-hun sat in the back, his injured ankle pulsing under the med patch. He watched Hai-Su's jaw tighten, but she said nothing more. The days settled into a brutal rhythm. Every lesson, every drill was a fresh humiliation. Combat drills against holographic opponents used attack angles and speeds calibrated for faster species. Humans were always a half-step too slow. Engineering classes assumed a natural, instinctive understanding of plasma field dynamics that human brains simply didn't possess. They were given tools that felt awkward in human hands, designed for different grips, different strengths. Ji-hun's ankle healed, but a deeper bruise was forming on his spirit. They were being taught a language they could not speak, a dance they could not hear the music for. They were being molded into a shape that did not fit. Late one night, in the dim light of the human cadet's common room, the mood was bleak. Junesio, the med student, was massaging a sore shoulder. Meekyoung, the former gymnast, was quietly stretching, her face pinched with frustration. "We're trying to be them," Ji-hun said quietly, staring at the floor. "And we can't. We'll never be them." Hai-Su looked up from her datapad. "Then we stop trying." Everyone looked at her. "What does that mean?" asked Taemin, the electrician. "Give up?" "No," Hai-Su said. "It means we look at the problem differently." She gives us a wrench and says, "Turn this quantum bolt." The wrench is made for a hand with 3 fingers and twice our strength. We keep trying and failing to turn it. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "We don't need to turn the bolt. We need to ask why the bolt needs to be turned. What is it holding? Is there another way to secure it? Or do we even need it at all?" Ji-hun thought of his father's shop again. The right tool for the job. But if you didn't have the right tool, you found another tool, or you changed the job.it was a rebellious thought. It went against everything Valkyra was teaching them. To follow the protocol, to accept their place, to mitigate their flaws. But as he lay in his narrow bunk later, the memory of Hai-Su's slow, calculated traversal of the gravity path came back to him. She hadn't done it the Trilixian way. She had done it the human way. She had used observation and pause. She had broken the fluid motion into pieces she could manage. It wasn't victory. But it wasn't total failure either. It was a tiny crack in the wall of certainty that Valkyra had built around them. They just had to figure out how to widen it. The defeat was a taste that lingered, like copper in the mouth. The physical failures were bad, but the intellectual dismissals were worse. They eroded something inside. Ji-hun found himself moving through the academy's luminous halls like a ghost, his thoughts dull. He fixed things in his father's shop. Here, he was just another broken part in a machine that didn't want him. The only class that didn't involve active humiliation was Galactic History and Integration. It was taught by a Groxel, Instructor Borlu, a gentle, furry being who spoke in a slow, rumbling voice. The class was mostly considered a rest period by the other alien cadets, a time to review notes from more important subjects. For the humans, it was a quiet refuge. Borlu was showing holos of early integration events. First contacts, trade agreements, the founding of the council. The images showed sleek alien vessels and strange, beautiful worlds. Then a brief clip appeared. It was grainy, older footage. It showed a small, blocky, human deep-sea mining platform in the Pacific Ocean. Next to it, half-submerged and tilted at a sickening angle, was a Trilixian atmospheric scout. Its usual crystalline elegance was marred by scorch marks and a ruptured hull section. "This is a minor footnote," Borlu droned, "but an interesting one. Early in the integration process, a Trilixian scout experienced a catastrophic systems failure in Earth's magnetosphere. It made an emergency descent into your ocean. The event is logged as Incident 722 Alpha." Ji-hun, who had been slouching, slowly sat up straight. On the screen, human engineers in bulky atmospheric suits were moving around the damaged ship. They were using welding tools and large, crude-looking metal braces. "Standard procedure for such a failure would be to await a Trilixian recovery team," Borlu continued. However, atmospheric decay and structural stress were immediate threats. The humans on the nearby platform initiated an unsolicited rescue operation. The footage switched to a diagram. It showed the Trilixian ship's damaged power coupling, a complex piece of technology. Next to it, a simplified schematic appeared, showing a series of bypasses using heavy cables and what looked like a modified reactor core from the mining platform. Lacking the proper tools, Borlu said, a hint of something like amusement in his rumble. The human team stabilized the Trilixian vessel's core by rerouting power through their own platform systems. They then cut through the compromised hull using industrial diamond saws, tools meant for cutting rock, not polycrystalline alloy, and extracted the 3 crew members. All survived. The image changed to a formal, posed photo. 3 Trilixians, looking stiff and uncomfortable, stood beside a group of grinning, exhausted human engineers in oil-stained overalls. The caption read, "Post-Rescue Debrief, Joint Station." The official report commends the primitive but effective actions and notes the event accelerated integration talks. Borlu concluded, moving to the next slide about trade tariffs. The classroom was quiet. The other alien cadets saw nothing important. A ship broke. Some monkeys fixed it with their crude tools. A footnote. But Hai-Su was staring at the screen as if it held a secret code. Her fingers flew over her data pad, pulling up the Academy's public archives. She searched for Incident 722, Alpha. The official record was bland. Paragraph. Scout vessel experienced unexpected harmonic resonance with planetary magnetic field. Systems cascade. Emergency landing. Assisted by local sentience. No loss of life. There was no detail about the diamond saws. No mention of the jury-rigged power bypass. No diagram. The humans were local sentience, not engineers. The word rescue was not used. It was assistance. Yihan leaned over. "What is it?" "They're hiding it," Hai-Su whispered, her voice low and intense. "They're making it sound like we just pulled them from a wreck. We didn't. We repaired their ship. We understood their systems enough to stop them from exploding with our tools. That's not a minor incident. That's a threat." "A threat? We saved them." "Exactly," Hai-Su said, turning her dark eyes to him. "We saved them when they couldn't save themselves." To a species like the Trilixians, perfection isn't just a goal. It's their identity. A perfect ship shouldn't fail. A perfect species shouldn't need saving. And certainly not by the inefficient newcomers. It's a stain, a vulnerability. The idea settled over Jihan like a cold mist. Valkyra's constant disdain. It wasn't just general superiority. It was personal. It was active. They weren't just failing. They were being set up to fail, to permanently erase the embarrassment of that day in the ocean. After class, they found a small, unused maintenance alcove behind the hydration processors. The hum of the machines masked their voices. Hai-Su had called Jun Seo and Mikyung. Taemin, the electrician, was the last to arrive. His hands still smudged with conductive grease from a wiring tutorial. Hai-Su showed them the footage and her findings. "She doesn't just think we're weak," Hai-Su said. "She's afraid of what we are." "Afraid?" Mikyung scoffed, rubbing a sore muscle in her neck. "She treats us like bugs. She treats us like a virus," Junseo said quietly, his medical mind making a different connection. "Something that doesn't follow the rules of the body. Something unpredictable. You try to contain it, suppress it, prove it's harmless." Taemin studied the diagram of the jury-rigged power bypass. A slow grin spread across his face. "Look at that," he said, pointing. "That's beautiful." They didn't have a Class 2 plasma conduit, so they used 3 heavy-duty copper cables from the platform's crane system. They spliced them into the emergency port. That's insane. And it worked. "That's what she hates," Jihan said, the pieces clicking into place. "It's not that we're bad at being them. It's that we're good at being us. We see a problem and we use whatever is at hand to solve it. We don't wait for the right tool. We make the tool. But they've built this whole place to stop us from doing that," Mikyung said. "Every test, every lesson. It's a box. They're trying to keep us in the box." For the first time in weeks, Jihan didn't feel defeated. He felt a spark of the old, stubborn energy from his father's shop. When a customer brought in a strange, imported appliance with a weird plug, you didn't just say, "I can't fix this." You figured out an adapter. You changed the plug. "So we need to learn the box," he said slowly. We need to learn all their rules, all their protocols. Not to follow them, but to know where the seams are. To know where we can adapt.
Yesu nodded.
We stop trying to win her game. We start learning how her game is built. Then we find a way to play our own game on her board. It was a subtle shift, but it changed everything. The next day, during a frustrating navigation seminar on preset warp calculations, Ji-hun didn't just zone out. He listened intently. He noted how the Trilixian system was absolute. It demanded a specific entry vector, a specific power curve. It had no room for error. It was perfect and therefore fragile. A single variable out of place caused a system-wide recalculation that took whole seconds. An eternity in warp navigation. He thought, what if you had a system that could absorb errors? A system that could adjust on the fly even if it was less perfect at the start. He didn't say it. He just wrote it down in his private notes, in simple Korean characters. The perfect path breaks. The messy path bends. Haisu, in tactical sims, stopped arguing for human intuition. She started asking precise, technical questions about enemy sensor ranges, about the power drain of their shields, about the thermal signature of their engines. She was no longer trying to be a Trilixian commander. She was reverse engineering their logic, looking for the constants in their equations that she could later turn into variables. They were no longer just cadets. They were spies in plain sight, and their mission was to understand the one thing Valkyra feared they already knew. That humanity's greatest weakness, their need to adapt, to improvise, to use a rock as a hammer when no hammer was there, was also a power the orderly galaxy had forgotten how to recognize. The weight of failure began to feel lighter. It was no longer a verdict. It was data. Each humiliating stumble in the variable gravity drills taught them about the Trilixian expectation of grace. Each dismissed tactical idea showed them the limits of the accepted logic. They were mapping the edges of the box, and quietly, secretly, they were beginning to look for a way out. The crucible was quiet. This was different from the usual training noise. A heavy, watchful silence filled the vast sphere. Today was the gauntlet, the final survival simulation. It would determine which cadets progressed to specialized training, and which would be relegated to low-tier support roles. For the humans, everyone knew, it was likely a final judgment. Instructor Valkyra stood before them, her crystalline form reflecting the dim light. Behind her, the holographic projector shimmered, ready to create the test environment. The gauntlet is the ultimate application of taught principles, she announced, her voice echoing. You will be deposited on a simulated asteroid. The environment is hostile. There are predators, terrain hazards, and atmospheric decay. Your suit will provide limited life support. Scattered across the simulation are 4 beacons. Activating a beacon signals completion and extraction. She paced, her dark eyes moving over their faces. Success requires self-reliance. It requires the disciplined, individual application of the survival protocols you have learned. You will not have your cohort. You will not have help. This tests the individual, not the collective. That is your species' greatest flaw, your crutch. It is removed. Ji-hun felt a chill. Individual. They had spent weeks being told they were only viable as a group, that their groupthink was a weakness. Now, at the most critical moment, the test was designed to force them to act alone. It was a contradiction. Felt like a trap. Point. One by one, the cadets were called forward. A platform glowed, and a cadet would stand on it. There was a flash of light, and they vanished, teleported into the simulation. The observation platforms above were crowded with aliens from other cohorts, watching the human experiment with detached curiosity. Ji-hun watched Haisu go. Her face was a mask of concentration. She vanished in a silent sparkle of light. Then it was his turn. He stepped onto the platform. Valkyra gave him a final, unreadable look. The world dissolved into white light and a feeling of falling that he landed on rough, gray rock. The sky above was a black dome studded with unfamiliar stars. The air was thin and cold, leaching heat through his suit. His helmet display flickered to life, showing his oxygen level, a crude terrain map, and the distant, pulsing icons of the 4 beacons. They were far apart, very far apart. The first rule was to check his surroundings. The protocol was clear. Secure your landing zone, assess resources, then move with purpose toward the nearest objective. He did that. He saw a fissure in the rock to his left, a potential shelter. He saw streaks of a shiny mineral that might be used to reflect heat. He noted it all. Then he moved. The low gravity made his strides long and bounding, but the uneven surface was treacherous. He remembered the variable gravity path. He forced himself to move slower than he wanted, choosing his footing with care. He had gone maybe half a kilometer when his suit chimed a warning. A small, scuttling creature made of sharp angles and shimmering holographic light, a simulated predator, burst from a crevice. It moved with the same terrifying fluidity as the manted cadet. The combat protocol flashed in his mind. Assume balanced stance. Identify primary striking limb. Disable with targeted force. He braced himself, trying to mirror the Trilixian combat forms. It was a disaster. The creature was too fast. It darted in, a sharp limb grazing his leg. His suit integrity dropped by 10%. He swung, but his punch, designed for a heavier opponent, missed in the low gravity, throwing him off balance. He stumbled back, his heart hammering. He wasn't a Trilixian warrior. Trying to be one was getting him killed in a simulation. He did the only thing that felt human. He turned and ran. Not a graceful, tactical retreat. An awkward, bounding, desperate scramble. He didn't look for an opening to counterattack. He looked for a hole to hide in. He spotted a narrow crack in a rock face and shoved himself into it, his back against the cold stone. The creature skittered past the entrance, then moved on, programmed to seek easier prey. He sat there, breathing hard, the taste of fear in his mouth. This was wrong. All of it. He was following the manual for a species he wasn't, in an environment designed for them. He opened a private channel on his comms, a low-power, short-range link the instructors might not monitor. Hi Su? Jun SEO? Anyone? Static. Meekyung? Taemin? More static. They were alone. Truly alone. He waited for his breathing to calm. He looked at his map. The nearest beacon was a 2-hour trek at good speed. He didn't have good speed. He had survival speed. He moved out again, abandoning the idea of a balanced stance or targeted force. He moved like a scavenger. He stuck to shadowed areas. He listened for the scuttling sounds. When he saw another predator in the distance, he froze, then slowly, painfully slowly, crawled behind a boulder until it passed. It was inelegant. It was slow. It was pure, undignified survival. He checked the roster on his display. One by one, the names of the other human cadets began to blink red, then gray out. Eliminated. He saw Junesio's name go dark. Then Meekyung's. His chest tightened. He pushed on, his method working, but it was taking forever. His oxygen ticked down. He was only a third of the way to the beacon. Then he saw something on the edge of his sensor. A suit signature. It was Haisu. Her icon was stationary, not moving toward any beacon. She was in a small canyon. He changed course, moving toward her. A violation of the individual rule. He found her at the bottom of a shallow ravine. She wasn't hurt. She was sitting on a rock, studying her data pad, which was wired directly into a cracked open panel on the canyon wall. A simulation of a damaged power relay. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice scratchy over the comm. "They said there were environmental hazards," she said, not looking up. "This relay is leaking radiation. It's creating a dead zone for the beacon signals. It's also poisoning the local atmosphere. The protocol is to mark it and avoid it. So avoid it. Let's go." She shook her head inside her helmet. "The fastest path to beacons 2 and 3 goes right through the edge of this dead zone. Signal loss means disorientation. People will get lost, waste oxygen. This isn't just a hazard. It's a bottleneck. It's designed to funnel us into the hunting grounds of the higher-level predators." Ji-hun understood. She wasn't playing the survival game. She was analyzing the simulation's code. "Can you fix it?" "No, not with the tools we're given. And not in the time I have." She looked at him, and he saw the grim calculation in her eyes. "But I can fail strategically." "What?" "I can't win this test, Ji-hun. None of us can. It's not for us. So the goal changes. I'm going to stay here and gather as much data on the simulation systems as I can before my oxygen runs out or a predator finds me. I need you to do something else. Anything. Get eliminated. He stared at her. What? Go out there. Pick a fight with one of the larger predators. Don't try to win. Just engage. Let it tag you. Get yourself pulled from the simulation early. Why? Because the observation decks are full, she said, her voice low and urgent. They're all watching us fail one by one in real time. But once you're dead, you go to the observation lounge. You can watch the rest of the simulation from there. You can see what we can't see down here. The big picture. Where the predators spawn. How the terrain shifts. The patterns. We need that data more than we need one more person stumbling around in the dark. It was a crazy, brilliant, self-sacrificing plan. It went against every instinct to compete, to fight to the end. It was the ultimate adaptation. If you can't win the game, change the objective. He nodded. Okay. He didn't say goodbye. He just turned and climbed out of the ravine. He didn't look for a safe path. He looked for movement. He found a large, six-legged predator near a glowing mineral deposit. He didn't assume a stance. He just screamed, a raw, human yell of defiance, and ran straight at it, waving his arms. It reacted instantly, lashing out. A sharp limb connected with his chest. His suit shrieked in alarm. Integrity critical. Simulation terminated. The asteroid faded into white light. He found himself standing on the return platform in the crucible. His body was whole, but his pride felt shattered. He stepped off, avoiding the eyes of the alien observers. He walked straight to the observation lounge, a room with a huge window looking into the holographic arena. On the massive screen, he saw the remaining human cadets as tiny dots. He saw Haisu's still in the ravine. He saw Taemin, moving with surprising stealth, but heading right into the dead zone Haisu had identified. He saw the predator spawn points light up on a map only the observers could see. He saw the pattern. It was a grinding, inevitable funnel, herding the humans into zones of maximum disadvantage. He watched, his hands clenched, as one by one, the remaining dots winked out. Haisu's dot was the last to go gray, just as a predator swarm closed in on her ravine. The simulation ended. The gauntlet was over. The human cohort had not activated a single beacon. Total failure. But as Ji-hun stood in the quiet lounge, his mind was not on the failure. It was on the map, the patterns, the data. Haisu was right. They had learned the wrong lesson for the test, but they had learned the right lesson about the testers. They now knew the shape of the trap. The next step was to figure out how to spring it on someone else. The days after the gauntlet were heavy with a silent verdict. No one spoke of it. The human cadets moved through their routines like shadows. Their spirits dimmed. Instructor Valkyra offered no critique, no final condemnation. Her silence was worse. It was the sound of a case being closed. They were now just background fixtures, awaiting assignment to waste processing or low-orbit maintenance. The roles the galaxy had prepared for them. Ji-hun worked in the Academy's machine shop, a punishment detail for his low scores. He was cleaning plasma cutters, tools that felt all wrong in his hand. When the station's comm was ripped apart, a deep, shuddering boom echoed through the deck plates, more felt than heard. The lights flickered, dipping to a dull red before snapping back. A screaming alarm began to wail, a sound they had only heard in drills. This was not a drill. The vibration in the floor was real. A voice, sharp and metallic, erupted from every comm panel and personal pad. All cadets, emergency containment protocol. Report to your designated shelters. This is not an exercise. Ji-hun dropped the cutter and ran out into the corridor. Cadets of all species were streaming in an orderly, if hurried, flow towards the shelter zones. He saw Haisu, her face pale but focused, pushing against the current towards an observation window. He followed her. Outside, against the star-dusted black, a nightmare was unfolding. A bulky, ovoid freighter, the Kelvin Hulk, was tumbling slowly. Bright orange gas and crystalline debris vented from a huge rupture in its side. Its navigation lights were dead. But its momentum was carrying it, slowly and surely, on a collision course with one of the Academy's long, slender docking spines. A spine full of classrooms and labs. On the large screen in the corridor, a broadcast from the command center appeared. Instructor Valkyra was there, her crystalline form sharp against the glowing tactical displays. Her voice was calm, too calm. This is a Code 13. The Kale Van Hulk has suffered a catastrophic containment failure in its biocrystalline or bay. The crew is incapacitated by a neural scrambler field emitted from the damaged ore. The field induces severe synaptic disorientation. It is lethal to most organic life forms with prolonged exposure. The screen split, showing a schematic of the freighter. A pulsing red zone marked the scrambler field's reach. It covered the entire crew deck and the approaches to the engine core. Standard procedure requires the deployment of shielded, remote-piloted bots to secure the cargo and initiate a controlled engine burn to alter the ship's trajectory, Valkyra continued. The Academy's complement of Mark 7 hazard bots was dispatched yesterday to the Trelixian homeworld for a training demonstration. Recovery time, 6 hours. Impact with the docking spine, 47 minutes. A murmur of fear ran through the watching cadets. 6 hours. They had 47 minutes. Valkyra's dark eyes seemed to look right through the screen. The scenario is untenable for organic intervention. The scrambler field cannot be neutralized remotely. We will seal the affected spine, evacuate personnel, and initiate localized thrusters on the Academy structure to minimize impact damage. Prepare medical teams for casualties from the collision. All cadets are to stand down and proceed to shelters. The screen shifted to a damage control schematic. They were going to let it crash. They were going to sacrifice a part of the station because the right tool wasn't there. Ji-hun stared, his mind racing. A neural scrambler, disorientation, like being drunk, or seasick, or, he turned to Hai-Su. Her eyes were wide, her mind clearly running down the same path. The field, she breathed. It doesn't destroy, confuses. It scrambles signals. In the history module, Borlu had mentioned human tolerance to neurochemical agents. For survival, for recreation. The human brain was a messy, adaptive thing. It could function under chemical duress. It had to. The bots are gone, Ji-hun said, his voice low. But we're not. Just then, Taemin and Juneseo pushed through to them. Taemin's hands were black with carbon scoring. He'd been in the power relay lab. The thrusters they're talking about, he said, his voice urgent. They're for fine adjustment. They can't move the whole station fast enough. That spine will snap off. If it hits the primary life support cluster, he didn't need to finish. They all looked at the schematic on the screen. The spine was a dagger aimed at the station's heart. Mi-kyung joined them, her gymnast's body tense. They're giving up? She said, disbelief in her voice. No, Hai-Su said. They're following protocol. The protocol says only shielded bots can enter. No bots, no solution. They'd rather lose a part of the station than break the rule. On the screen, Valkyra was directing crews, her voice still that infuriating, perfect calm. Seal sections 5 through 8 of docking spine gamma. Divert all power from those sections. She was writing off the spine. She was writing off anyone who might still be in it. She was following the manual. Ji-hun looked at his friends. He saw the same realization on their faces. They were not Valkyra. They did not have her perfect tools. They had what they had. The scrambler field, Juneseo said, his medical training kicking in. Symptoms would be loss of balance, vertigo, nausea, confusion, intense headache. Like the worst migraine and seasickness combined. We can endure that, Ji-hun said. We have endured that. People live with that. For minutes, maybe, Juneseo said. Not for the time it would take to get to the engine room. Then we go in pieces, Hai-Su said, her tactical mind locking onto the problem. We don't try to be heroes. We be a relay team. Short, brutal exposures. We get the job done in stages. It's impossible, Mi-kyung whispered, watching the tumbling freighter on the screen. Everything here is impossible for us, Taemin said. a wild, grim light in his eyes. According to them, since when does that stop us? They were all looking at Ji-hun. He was no leader. He was a mechanic's son. But he understood broken systems. He understood making do. He made a decision. It felt less like courage and more like the only switch left to flip. Follow me, he said, and he turned, not toward the shelters, but toward the service corridors. They moved quickly, against the flow of traffic. They reached a supply bay for the maintenance crews. It was chaotic, with a few harried Groxel technicians trying to secure equipment. We need environment suits, Ji-hun said to a Groxel. The heavy-duty ones for hull repair. The Groxel blinked its large eyes. Cadets are to shelter. The command? The command is going to let that ship cut the station in half. Hai-Su cut in, her voice sharp. We are offering to try. Give us the suits. Perhaps it was the desperation in her voice, or the sheer insanity of the idea. The Groxel hesitated, then pointed to a rack. Take them. But the scrambler field. We know, Ji-hun said. The suits were not combat armor. They were bulky, reinforced canvas and polymer, meant for handling tools in vacuum, not for elegance. They had basic mag boots and thruster packs. The helmets had simple heads-up displays. They were human-made, a design from before full integration. They were simple. They were tough. As they struggled into the suits, sealing the heavy clasps, the station shuddered again. A smaller impact. Debris had started to hit on a stolen data pad. Hai-Su pulled up the freighter schematic. The engine override is here, she said, pointing to a console deep in the ship. The path is through the main cargo bay, which is the source of the field. We can't avoid it. Can we shut the field off? Taemin asked. Only by securing the or containers manually, which is in the same bay. So we go through hell to get to the engine, or we go through hell to shut it off. Either way, Mi-kyung trailed off. We go through hell, Ji-hun finished. He looked at their faces, pale inside the helmets. We go in. We do what we can. When you can't take it anymore, you fall back. Someone else goes forward. We are a chain, a human chain. We pass the task along. It was a plan born of utter necessity, with no guarantee of success. It was the opposite of Valkyra's perfect, solitary protocol. It was messy. It was dependent on each other. It was everything they had been told was wrong. Sealed in their suits, they moved to a secondary airlock, one used for station maintenance. No one tried to stop them. To the orderly galaxy, they were already ghosts as the airlock cycle began. The outer door hissed open, revealing the silent, terrible beauty of space and the slowly growing bulk of the dying freighter. Hai-Su's voice came over the suit, calm, tight but clear. Remember, they think we are not special. They think we are fragile. Let's go be fragile together. Ji-hun took the first step out into the void. The silence of space was not empty. It was filled with the pounding of Ji-hun's own heart in his ears and the ragged sound of his breathing inside the helmet. The freighter filled his view, a mountain of dented metal and broken edges. The tear in its side was a jagged black mouth, venting shimmering crystal dust that caught the sunlight like frozen tears. He activated his thruster pack. It was a clumsy, jerky thing compared to the smooth glides of the Trelixian suits they trained in. Pushed him forward in a lurch. Behind him, he felt more than heard the others follow. A chain of 4 more ungainly shapes leaving the clean, bright order of the academy for the broken dark. The trip across the open void was short but terrifying. His mind screamed about the infinite fall, the cold, the utter lack of anything to hold on to. He focused on the growing shadow of the freighter's hull. He grabbed onto a torn piece of plating at the edge of the rupture. His mag boots clanged as they locked on, the sound a distant vibration through his suit. That he looked back. Hai-Su, Taemin, Mi-kyung, and Junicio were all there, clinging to the metal like insects. He gave a thumbs up, for shaky thumbs up came in return. No going back now. He turned and looked into the ship. The hole led into the vast cargo bay. It was a cathedral of disaster. Twisted metal gantries hung like broken bones. Containers were scattered, some cracked open, spilling their contents. Glowing, pulsing green crystals the size of a man's torso. These were the biocrystalline or pods, and they were the source of the nightmare. Even from the edge, Ji-hun felt it. A buzzing in his teeth, a strange pressure behind his eyes. The scrambler field. It was like walking into a loud, invisible noise. Go! Haisu's voice crackled in his ear, strained already. Short moves. Communicate. Ji-hun pushed off, floating into the bay. The effect was immediate and violent. The world tilted. His stomach lurched as if he'd stepped off a cliff. A blinding headache spiked behind his forehead. The clear, organized lines of the cargo bay shimmered and swam. Up and down lost meaning. His body felt like it belonged to someone else. He tried to speak. I'm in. The words were slurred, thick. He sounded drunk. Path, left. Haisu's voice came, slow and deliberate, fighting through the same fog. Gantry to the upper deck. Ji-hun saw the gantry, or what his screaming brain told him was a gantry. It was a twisted, writhing snake of metal. He grabbed for a handhold, missed, and tumbled, spinning slowly in the 0G of the bay. He choked back vomit. He forced his eyes to focus on a single, solid-looking bolt on the gantry. He aimed for it, flailing. His hand closed around it. He pulled himself. It took minutes to travel what should have taken seconds. Each movement was a battle against a brain drowning in static. He reached the end of the gantry, a platform that led to a doorway, the passage deeper into the ship. At the door, he grunted. Can't see the control. Taemin. Go, Haisu ordered. Behind him, Taemin pushed off from the hull. Ji-hun watched him come, his movements even more uncoordinated, like a puppet with cut strings. Taemin bounced off a floating container, cursing in a thick, garbled stream of Korean, and spun towards the platform. Ji-hun reached out a shaking hand and caught his arm. Pulling him down, Taemin's face inside his helmet was pale and slick with sweat. His eyes couldn't seem to focus. But his hands, those electrician's hands, knew their work. He fumbled a tool from his suit belt, a simple multi-driver. He shoved it into the door control panel, pried it open. Inside was a nest of glowing, alien circuitry. Red means power, Taemin mumbled to himself, his words dripping slowly. Cut the red. No. Bridge the green to the yellow, bypass the safeties. His hands trembled, but they moved. He wasn't following a schematic. He was following a deep, instinctive feel for how energy wanted to flow. He ripped 2 wires free, stripped them with his teeth, and twisted them together. The door slid open with a groan. A wave of even denser, more intense disorientation washed out. Ji-hun gagged. Taemin slumped against the wall, his eyes rolling back for a second. Junso, Haisu called. Ready. Juneseo moved next. His job was the crew. As he pushed past Ji-hun into the corridor, his medical training was his anchor. He ignored the spinning world and looked for symptoms. He saw a manted crew member curled in a shaking ball. He saw a Groxel stumbling into a wall, again and again. He didn't try to understand their alien biology. He saw distress. He pulled a hypospray from his kit, a general stimulant from the station's supplies. He didn't know the exact dosage for a mantid. He guessed low. He pressed it to the creature's carapace and injected. The mantid's shuddering slowed. It was not a cure. It was a temporary crutch. He moved to the next. Mikyung was next in the relay. Her path was the most physical. The way to the engine room was through a vertical shaft, its ladder rungs torn away. The others couldn't climb it in their state. She could. As Juneseo passed her, giving a shaky nod, she launched herself into the shaft. Her gymnast's sense of kinesthesia, of where her body was in space, was completely broken by the scrambler field. So she abandoned it. She didn't try to feel her way. She used her eyes only. She found a bolt. She grabbed it. She found a torn cable. She pulled. It was a slow, brutal, spider-like climb, each movement a separate, agonizing decision. Halfway up, she froze, paralyzed by vertigo, clinging to the wall as the world spun. Breathe, Mikyung. Haisu's voice came, calm at the center of the storm. One hand, then the next. Mikyung sobbed, a short, sharp sound, and moved her hand. Hai-Su, meanwhile, had anchored herself at the entry point. She was the brain. The others were bringing her data through their suit cameras, fragmented and shaky. Her own head felt like it was splitting open, but she forced her eyes to stay on her data pad, wired to the ship's damaged systems. She was trying to calculate the engine override sequence. The numbers and symbols danced on the screen. She couldn't think in long equations, so she broke it down. She solved one tiny part, then the next. She vomited suddenly into her helmet, the sour smell filling the space. She wiped her mouth with a trembling hand and went back to the numbers. Back at the doorway, Ji-hun watched Taemin and Juneseo work. He was the anchor for the first part of the chain. His job was to watch, to help, to be there. He saw the freighter's slow, grinding turn towards the station's spine on his wrist display. Time was a bleeding wound. He looked at his friends. They were broken. They were sick. They were trembling, crying, fighting just to stay conscious. They were everything Valkyra said they were: fragile, inefficient, disordered. But they were not stopping. They were passing the task along. They were sharing the burden of the impossible. They were enduring what the perfect species had declared unendurable. Not with grace, but with sheer, stubborn, ugly will. I end that moment, covered in his own sweat and fear, watching Mikyung climb through hell and Hai-Su calculate through pain. Ji-hun understood. Their weakness was their strength. Because they knew they were weak, they leaned on each other. Because their brains were being scrambled, they used 5 brains instead of 1. Because they didn't have the right tool, they became the tool. The galaxy saw a chain as a constraint, a limit. For humans, a chain was a lifeline, a way to pull each other forward. Hai-Su! He rasped into the calm. Almost time. He looked at the path ahead. Past the shaft was the final stretch to the engine room. It was his turn to go forward again. He took a deep breath of the stale, stinking air in his helmet and prepared to let go of the bolt. The air in Ji-hun's helmet was thick with the smell of sweat and acid. His head was a ball of throbbing pain, each pulse of his heart sending a fresh wave of nausea through him. He watched Mikyung's boots disappear into the top of the access shaft. She had made it. Engine deck. Clear. Her voice crackled, each word dragged out over broken glass. But door sealed. Manual. Override. Stuck. It was his turn. The final link in the chain. He pushed off from the platform where he'd been anchoring Taemin and Juneseo. The world did a slow, sickening roll. He closed his eyes for a second, fighting the vertigo. When he opened them, he fixed his gaze on the opening of the shaft and nothing else. He didn't think about climbing. He thought about reaching the next handhold. He moved into the shaft. The scrambler field here felt like a physical weight pressing down on his mind. His muscles didn't want to obey. His left arm jerked uselessly for a moment before he forced his hand to close around a broken pipe. He pulled. It was a journey of inches. He climbed past a smudge of blood on the wall where Mikyung's glove had torn. He climbed past a floating tool that spun lazily in the zero-G. He focused only on the next grip, the next foothold. His universe shrank to the next 6 inches of torn metal. He reached the top. Mikyung was there, slumped against a bulkhead, her chest heaving. She pointed a trembling finger down a short corridor. At the end was a heavy, vault-like door. The engine room. Ji-hun moved toward it, his mag boots clanging with each clumsy step. The manual override wheel was there, but a twisted piece of fallen support beam was jammed against it, pinning it shut. He pulled. The beam didn't move. He was too weak, his senses too scrambled. He looked at it. It wasn't a problem of strength. It was a problem of physics. On his belt was a standard maintenance tool. A long, heavy pry bar. The right tool would have been a plasma cutter. He had a pry bar. He wedged it between the beam and the wall. He pushed down. Nothing. His arms shook. He changed the angle. He pushed again. Tiny shift. A groan of metal. He braced his boot against the wall and put his entire weight on the bar, leaning into it with a guttural cry that was pure effort and pain. The beam screeched and bent, just enough. He dropped the bar, grabbed the override wheel with both hands, and turned. His muscles screamed. The wheel moved a centimeter, then another. With a final, shuddering clank, the door's locking mechanism released. The door slid open a foot and jammed again. It was enough. Inside was chaos. The engine core, a pulsating column of contained blue energy, was loud and hot. Warning lights flashed silently. The control console was dark, dead. But next to it was a secondary panel, a physical backup for emergencies. This was the manual ignition for the maneuvering thrusters. The last, desperate way to shove the ship off its fatal course. The console was simple. A big, red safety cover. A sequence of 3 buttons. A final lever. But between him and the console, the floor plates were missing. Below was a churning pit of machinery and searing energy from the damaged core. It was a 3-meter gap. A jump in 0G with a spinning brain and failing body. He looked back. Mikyung was out, her eyes closed behind her visor. He was the last one in the chain. He heard Hai-Su's voice, thin and stretched over the comm. Sequences, blue, yellow, red, then lever. You have to hold lever for 5 seconds. Blue, yellow, red. He repeated it in his mind. A simple children's game. But his mind kept trying to swap the colors. He looked at the gap. He couldn't jump. He would miss and tumble into the pit. Then he saw the cable. A thick, insulated power cable, torn from its housing, snaked across the gap, its end dangling near the console. It was anchored on his side. An idea formed, broken and desperate. He wouldn't jump. He would swing. He unhooked a safety tether from his suit. It was too short. He looked around, his vision swimming. He saw a length of flexible conduit, knocked loose from the wall. He grabbed it. With fumbling, numb fingers, he tied the conduit to his tether, making a longer, weaker line. He looped it around the thick power cable and tied it off, testing the knot. It was a terrible knot. It might hold. He didn't think. If he thought, he would freeze. He grabbed the line, backed up 2 steps in the corridor, and ran for the edge. He leaped into nothing. The line went taut. The knot held for a second, then slipped, burning through his gloves. He was falling, but slower. He swung across the gap like a pendulum, his body slamming into the console on the other side. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. He clung to the edge of the panel, his legs dangling over the abyss. He pulled himself up. The console was in front of him. The big red cover. He smashed it with his fist. The plastic shattered. 3 buttons. Blue, yellow, red. His finger hovered over blue. Was it blue? His mind screamed that it was green. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the confusion. He heard Hai-Su's voice. Blue, yellow, red. A lifeline in the storm. He pressed blue. A light flickered. Yellow. A low hum vibrated through the floor. Red. He grabbed the final lever. He pulled it down. Nothing happened. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the fog. He pulled again. It was stuck. A systems lock. The ship's damaged brain was refusing the command. He looked at the console. A small access panel was below the lever. He ripped it open. Inside was a mess of melted wires and a cracked crystal module, the command relay. It was shattered. Useless. The right tool was a new module. He didn't have one. He had his hands. He had the broken pieces. He reached in and pulled out the shattered crystal. He looked at the socket. He looked at the frayed ends of the wires. He didn't see a Trilixian system. He saw a broken connection in his father's shop. He didn't need to rebuild the module. He just needed to make a connection, to close the circuit, to say yes to the command. He took the 2 main wire ends. He stripped them with his teeth, the copper tasting bitter. He held the bare wires. He looked at the lever. This would bypass every safety. It would send raw power to the thrusters. It might burn them out. It might cause a feedback surge. It was the wrong way. It was the only way. He touched the bare wires together. A spark jumped, shocking his hand. On the console, every warning light blazed to life at once. The lever in his other hand suddenly vibrated. Alive. He held the wires together with one aching hand. With the other, he pulled the lever down. This time, it moved. A deep, grinding roar shook the entire ship. From outside, on the station, watchers saw a flash of orange fire erupt from the freighter's maneuvering thrusters. Not a clean, controlled burn. A sputtering, uneven, violent shove. Inside, Ji-hun held on. He held the wires. He held the lever. The count in his head was gone. He just held. The heat from the console burned through his gloves. The vibration felt like it would shake his bones apart. He screamed, a raw sound lost in the roar, just to remind himself he was still alive. After a lifetime, the roaring stopped. The lever snapped back up. He let go of the wires. His fingers cramped into claws. He slumped against the console. His wrist display flickered. The collision countdown was gone. Replaced by a new message. Trajectory altered. Minimum safe distance achieved. He had done it. With a pry bar, a piece of conduit, and 2 stripped wires, he had done it. He tried to stand. His legs wouldn't work. He floated, anchored only by one hand on the console. He looked back across the gap, towards the shaft, towards his friends. The chain had held. The fragile, human chain. They had passed the task from hand to shaking hand, through the pain and the confusion, and he had been the last link. He hadn't been special. He had just been there, at the end of the line, to make the final, terrible connection. He closed his eyes. The world was still spinning, but a different kind of quiet was beginning to settle. The quiet of a disaster that did not happen. The quiet after a strike that had not followed any of the rules. The silence was the first thing Ji-hun noticed. The terrible, roaring vibration of the engines was gone. The screaming pain in his head had faded to a dull, heavy throb. He was floating, one hand still locked on the hot console, in the sudden quiet of the engine room. The only sounds were his own ragged breathing and the faint, steady beep from his suit telling him he was still alive, that he didn't know how long he hung there. Time had lost its shape. Then, a different vibration. A cleaner, smoother sound. Trilixian rescue pods. Now that the scrambler field was dissipating and the ship was stable, docking with the freighter, strong, crystalline hands pulled him away from the console. He saw flashes of amber plates, heard calm, efficient voices speaking in their own language. They placed him on a stretcher and guided him back through the ship. He saw the others being carried too. Taemin, unconscious but breathing steady. Juneseo, giving weak directions to the Trilixian medics about the alien crew. Mikyung, her eyes open but unfocused. Haisu, her datapad still clutched in her hand. They were taken not to the medical bay, but to a stark, quiet debriefing chamber deep within the Academy's command section. The walls were a soft gray. There was a long table. They were helped into chairs, their bulky, stained maintenance suits still on. Medrones hovered, spraying their faces with a fine mist that cleared the last of the disorientation and eased their headaches. Felt shockingly kind. The door slid open. Instructor Valkyra entered. She was not as pristine as usual. There was a faint smudge of carbon scoring on one of her arm plates. Her movements were as fluid as ever, but there was a new stillness to her as she stood at the head of the table, looking at each of them, and no one spoke. Ji-hun just watched her, too tired for fear or anger. Valkyra activated a holographic recorder. A replay of the freighter incident began above the table. It showed their clumsy exit from the airlock, their ungainly flight across the void, their desperate, staggering progress through the ship. It showed Taemin's wild, improvised wiring. It showed Juneseo guessing with hyposprays. It showed Mikyung's frozen terror in the shaft. It showed Haisu vomiting and then going back to her calculations. It showed Ji-hun's brutal swing across the gap and his final, sparking connection. The recording ended. The room was silent again. Valkyra did not speak for a long time. She seemed to be studying the space where the images had been. "You disobeyed a direct order," she said finally. Her voice was not the sharp, chiming instrument of the classroom. It was lower, softer. "You entered an environment rated fatal for organic life. You used equipment not rated for the task. You performed medical procedures without species-specific knowledge. You bypassed core safety protocols on a Class 3 freighter. By every metric of this academy, by every standard of the Galactic Concord, your actions were incorrect, reckless, and deeply flawed. Each word was a fact. Ji-hun looked down at his burned gloves. She was right. And yet, she continued, the word hanging in the air, the Kalevan Hulk is secure. His crew is alive, recovering. The Academy docking spine is intact. There are 0 casualties. A scenario that was, by the book, untenable has been resolved. She took a single step closer. Her dark eyes rested on Ji-hun. You did not follow procedure because there was no procedure for what you did. You did not use the correct tools because the correct tools were absent. You operated for 22 minutes in a state of continuous neurological distress that would have rendered a Trilixian, or a Mantid, or a Groxel completely catatonic in 3. She turned her gaze to Haisu. You broke the problem into pieces your distressed minds could solve. You did not seek the optimal solution. You sought a possible solution. She looked at Taemin. You saw energy and made it flow by any means available. She looked at Jun Seo. You saw suffering and addressed the symptom with the nearest remedy. Finally, she looked at Mikyung and Ji-hun. You used your bodies not as perfect instruments, but as simple, stubborn tools to reach the next point. Valkyra paused again. It seemed to cost her something to form the next words. My species, the Trilixian Concord, we are engineered for excellence. Perfection is our goal. A tool has one purpose. A being has one specialty. Problem has one correct solution. This is clean. This is logical. It has made us strong. She gestured to the now dark space where the hologram had been. What you did was not clean. It was not logical. It was a series of desperate, ugly actions. You did not defeat the problem. You absorbed it. You let it break over you, and you persisted in pieces until, collectively, you reached the end. She finally looked at them all, her alien face unreadable, but her voice carrying a new weight. We said you were not special. We were wrong. We measured you against our scale, strength, speed, neural precision, specialized knowledge. You failed. But you were using a different scale entirely. Ji-hun found his voice. It was rough. What scale? Contextual survival, Valkyra said, as if tasting the concept. Your specialty is the absence of a single specialty. Your strength is that you are not optimized for any one thing, and thus can be adapted for anything. Your minds are not clean processors. They are resilient. They can function in noise, in chaos. You can repurpose anything, tools, ideas, your own suffering, to meet the immediate need. You rewrite the rules of the problem to fit the tools you have. She straightened up. The incident with the deep-sea platform. Incident 722 Alpha. We logged it as primitive assistance. We were uncomfortable with it. It suggested a capacity we did not understand. A capacity for improvisation that our perfect systems have no answer for. We feared it. I feared it. So I tried to prove it did not exist. I tried to prove you were simply inferior. She offered a small, stiff gesture with her hand, the Trilixian equivalent of a sigh. I have failed in that. You have demonstrated that humanity's weakness, your flexibility, your endurance, your interdependence, is a strategic variable we did not account for. It is not a lesser form of strength. It is a different kind of strength entirely. One that is messy, inefficient, and remarkably difficult to defeat. The words hung in the quiet room. They weren't praise. They were an analysis. But it was an honest one. What happens now? Haisu asked quietly. Now, Valkyra said, the curriculum changes. For everyone. The galaxy has believed for millennia that specialization is the only path to advancement. You have presented evidence of another path. It will be studied. It will be integrated. You will not be relegated to support roles. She looked at them, these 5 tired, dirty humans in their damaged suits. You will help us write a new manual. One that includes the human metric. One that asks not only, what is the perfect tool for the job, but also what can be used if the perfect tool is not there? She turned to leave, then stopped at the door. The next cohort begins in 30 cycles. You will be there, not as students, as assistant instructors. Your first lesson will be to explain to the new Trilixian cadets how you swung across an engine room on a piece of conduit. The door slid shut behind her. For a long moment, no one moved or spoke. The med-drones hummed softly. Ji-hun slowly peeled off his burned glove. His hand was red and blistered. It hurt. It was a real, simple pain. Taemin let out a shaky laugh. Assistant instructors? My mother will never believe it. Juniseo was smiling faintly. I need to write a paper on the effects of scrambler fields on human neuroplasticity. Mikyung just put her head down on the cool table. I never want to climb again. Haisu looked at Ji-hun. In her eyes, he saw the same exhausted, fierce light he felt in his own chest. They had not won. They had simply refused to be defined by the rules of a game they couldn't play. And in doing so, they had changed the game itself. They were not special the way the galaxy understood it. They were something else. They were adaptable. They were stubborn. They were together. And that, Ji-hun thought as he looked at his wounded hand and then at his friends, was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.